Hello and welcome. I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers50. Every year, Thinkers50 inducts new management thinkers into its Hall of Fame, which is supported by our partners at the Hire Group. The Hall of Fame recognizes and celebrates thinkers who have made a significant long-term contribution to management thinking and practice. This year's inductees into the Hall of Fame are a stellar group, and it is a pleasure to recognize their contribution. My guest today is one of those inductees, Stu Friedman. Stu is an organizational psychologist at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, where he's been on the faculty since 1984 and is now Emeritus Professor of Management Practice. Stu is founder and CEO of Total Leadership, a management training and consulting company. He worked for 5 years in the mental health field before earning his PhD from the University of Michigan. He was founding director of the Wharton Leadership Program and also founded Wharton's WorkLife Integration project in 1991. While on leave from Wharton for 2.5 years, Stu ran a 50-person department as a senior executive for leadership development at the Ford Motor Company. So he has had contact with the real world. He's also written 2 best-selling books. Total Leadership came out in 2008, and Leading the Life You Want, which came out in 2014. In 2013, Wharton School Press published his landmark study of 2 generations of Wharton students called Baby Bust. His Work and Family, Allies or Enemies came out in 2000 and was recognized by the Wall Street Journal as one of the field's best books. In Integrating Work and Life, the Wharton Resource Guide in 1998, Stu edited the first collection of learning tools for building leadership skills for integrating work and life. His latest book is Parents Who Lead, the leadership approach you need to parent with purpose, fuel your career and create a richer life. And that came out in 2020. So, Stu, welcome. How do you make sense of your career? Is there a golden thread which runs through it, a deep purpose? I suspect there is.
Well, first, thank you, Stuart, and your colleagues at Thinkers50 and the Hire Group for including me in this. It's a great honor and really a pleasure to be speaking with you. I think the thread is a concern for the next generation of people coming after us, coming after me. In my early work as a doctoral student at the University of Michigan, my dissertation research was on succession and development of the next generation of leaders in large companies, because I was very much interested in the progeneration of life in organizational settings and how we organize to ensure that the next generation thrives as organizations cultivating their leadership capacity over time. And it was sometime after that, when my first child was born in 1987, that I kind of pivoted in my research to focus on what it meant for us as individuals and organizations and society to be investing in the thriving of the next generation of people, full stop. Not just in organizational settings, and what that meant for us to be supporting parents and others who were committed to raising a healthy next generation. So I think, and that's pretty much what I've been doing ever since, is to do research, practice, teaching, and working with organizations around the world, helping them to find creative ways to support people in the interest they have in finding freedom to take up the roles that they want to take in life and at work in ways that enable them to be who they want to be, including and especially as working parents, but beyond that as well, and as it has unfolded. So I think the larger idea is to help ensure that people have the support to become who they want to become.
So really, you take a more, leadership always seems to me to be focused in general on the short-term sense of achievement and action. But actually you've been taking a much broader, holistic perspective on leadership. And a lot of your books actually trace that process and that wider lens of leadership, which kind of is against the prevailing wisdom or the prevailing emphasis in the business world, which is on the short term.
That's true. I began my career in the 70s as a psychologist. I worked in counseling centers and in psychiatric hospitals and studied, clinical psychology. That's where I began, and so my interest has always been on, the growth of individual capacities to change and to flourish. And that requires a perspective that looks back in time to your history, as well as looking forward to your vision of the world you want to try to create. So it's hard for me to think about how you could take, just a kind of snapshot approach to developing leadership capacity. But I agree, there is a short-term emphasis in our world, and I think that's part of what causes problems for us, is that we don't look back and learn from our past well enough, nor do we consider as clearly and conscientiously as we should the impact of our ideas and our actions on the generations to come.
So it's a big leap, or how big a leap was it from your clinical psychology studies to the boardroom, to executive level? Was it a big leap?
In some ways it was quite natural. The field of organizational psychology covers a lot of ground, and there are many of us who dig into the intrapersonal, that which is within us, as the focus of our attention, our research, and our practice and our teaching. So, there's room in that umbrella, under that umbrella, for that kind of inquiry, and to connect the development of an individual's capacity to lead the lives they truly want with the organizational realities that they contend with and try to shape was a really interesting challenge, and has continued to be for me, because there's always a conflict there. There's always tension, and so to find tools and methods that are evidence-based, that enable people to find a path that is true to who they have been, who they want to become, is a kind of it's a natural evolution of my interests as I look back on it. Of course, I didn't plan it that way to begin with, but looking back, it does kind of make sense to me that my interests would have evolved in that way.
So what was Wharton like in 1984? Because it's easy to forget that business schools are very different places. The emphasis of what people studied and the way they studied was hugely different from now. Say something like leadership wasn't actually that fashionable in 1984 as an area of study. It was only with Warren Bennis and others in the late 80s, it kind of entered the mainstream. So what was it like for you joining Wharton?
Yes, Stuart, you're an historian of our field, and so that the world was a very, very different one 40 years ago when I first started out as a young assistant professor at Wharton, where leadership was not taught. We didn't try to do that. We were teaching organizational studies, organizational behavior, which dealt with that topic, but it was very much dominated by, especially at Wharton, the economic paradigm. And those of us on the softer side of things were, we didn't have the same kind of strength or legitimacy in the larger conversation about business at that time. And indeed, at Wharton, especially in the 80s, we suffered from a reputation on a single-minded and almost ruthless emphasis on the Wall Street mentality of the day. And indeed, that is part of what motivated our school to make a change in the late 80s, early 90s, a change of which I was a part, to bring into our curriculum a central focus on developing leadership capacity. And so I was the founding director of the leadership program in 1991 when we changed our curriculum and brought into it a course that I was the course head for, which emphasized people working together in what we called learning teams. And they did work on real projects for many of the other courses throughout the year, the first year, in these teams for grades. And in our course, we looked at what was happening within these teams and gave them some tools for becoming more effective as teams, and compelled them to provide feedback to each other and to look at how they were operating. So to reflect on the work of the human dynamics of learning about leadership in a team environment was new, and there was a lot of resistance to it, as you can well imagine. And I'm happy to elaborate more on that. But yes, it was. It took time, and indeed there were those who didn't even want to call it a leadership program. They would prefer to refer to it as behavioral skills, and more of a kind of economics language. But I insisted we call it the leadership program, and now it's de rigueur in business schools, and it has become sort of part of our culture to be emphasizing the growth of leadership capacity. But that definitely was not happening at that time. And in the corporate world, in parallel, you were just seeing a kind of burgeoning of the whole concept of teaching leadership and giving people, better put, opportunities to learn leadership by doing it and reflecting on it in corporate learning institutes that were bubbling up all over, following the pronounced impact of what companies like General Electric and ExxonMobil and some others were doing at the time. So, throughout the 80s and 90s, you saw a much greater legitimacy for the work of investing in leadership development.
But your emphasis on learning, working in teams and learning from each other, where did that come from? Where were your inspirations? Where did you look as you shaped the program at that time?
Well, we were at the University of Michigan in the organizational psychology area. I was there from 1980 to 84, and that was just in the wake of the glorious explosion of humanism in the thinking about organizational success in the 70s, which emerged out of the 60s and existential psychology, and people exploring the meaning of existence in a new way, and bringing those ideas into how we were going about organizing labor, and how this approach might mean a radical shift in all kinds of practices, human resources, labor practices, throughout the world, especially in our country. So that those ideas were really taking hold, and the field of organizational psychology, as it was evolving, was very much embracing some of the critical ideas in clinical psychology and in group psychology, social psychology. So that was part of the zeitgeist, was to be using what we knew about how to make groups effective, how to make it easier for people to grow as individuals in the social world, including in the organizational world, was very much alive and current in the 80s. The field of adult socialization and development, that people could continue to grow and change over the course of their lives, was relatively new in modern thinking. So the influence of organizations as an important social context for shaping the opportunities that people had to become who they wanted to become was part of what influenced my own thinking. So that was part of it. I don't know if I'm getting at all that you're asking about here, but let me pause and see if I am.
Another interesting thing you were involved with at the same time was the Wharton's WorkLife Integration project, which you founded. And I can understand, as you say, the kind of the evolution of leadership and growth of the interest in leadership. But I think the Work-Life Integration project was way ahead of its time. In 1991, nobody was talking about work-life integration, really.
Back in 1991, there were very few men talking about this issue. Quite a few women were. And I guess I was lucky that I tuned into this question of how do we find creative ways to enable people to integrate the different parts of their lives in a way that works for them and for their organizations, their families, their communities. Because I paid attention to how I reacted to the arrival of my first child. Holding him for the first time, meeting him, and thinking, what am I going to do now to make sure that the world is a safe one for him to grow up in? It's going to nourish him, and realizing that was now the question that I could not ignore, and to which I didn't have ready answers, but knew that it was an essential question for me, and so I began asking everyone around me what they thought about that question, including my students at the Wharton School in October of 1987, when I returned to the classroom and asked them, what are you as future business leaders going to do to ensure that the next generation of people, not just talent in your business, are going to thrive? And the reactions of that class really changed everything for me, and helped to direct me to founding the Work-Life Integration Project and the work I've been doing since, which is kind of an amalgam of how do you grow as a leader and how do you integrate the different parts of your life in a way that works for the different parts. The students that day, many of them were quite angry that I was bringing this question up, primarily because they had prepared, for another class topic that we were supposed to do that day. But I just put it aside and said, there's something else that I want to talk with you about that is urgent. So let's get into this. And when I did, those students who had prepared for this other topic were angry that I wasn't addressing that. But more to the point, they were, some were saying, first of all, Professor, no one really cares about your family, so why are you talking about that? And this is a business school. We're here to talk about business, not about family life. So what are you doing? But there were others in the room, men and women, who were kind of leaning forward and, wow, I'm so glad someone's talking about this. Yes. And in response to my question, what are you going to do to make sure that the world is one in which, you know, children are nourished, the next generation is cultivated, so they can flourish? One student said, well, you're the professor, you tell us. And, you know, that's when a kind of a light bulb went off, and I realized, oh, right, I should find some answers. And so that began what became, you know, a lifelong quest to find answers to that question, through research, teaching, practice, in the real world, and part of that was to found the WorkLife Integration Project, where we were dedicated to doing research and scouring, you know, the world to find best practice, to understand the issue of how you integrate the different parts of life for mutual gain, and what you can do, to make the world better in the process of doing so.
Yeah, 30 years on, I wonder how do you rate? It seems to me that the work-life integration was something that seemed to be heading in the right direction 5 years ago, but since the pandemic, I think it's become harder, and it seems to be harder and harder for people to actually get that integration and the balance.
Well, yes and no. Before I address that, though, let me say one other thing about what it was like at that time that you asked about. It was very much seen as a women's issue, and it was kind of weird for me to be, you know, out front, on organizing a series of roundtables that we did, at Wharton, and then at Merck, who co-hosted these roundtables for us in the early and mid 90s, rather, where we were gathering knowledge from the real world about what it takes to, integrate the different parts of life for mutual gain as a leader in all of them. And as I pivoted my research from leadership succession and development, which is what I'd been doing, you know, following my dissertation research in the 80s, there were people advising me, like, what are you doing, Stu? You know, no one cares about this women's issue. You're doing, you know, this really interesting work in succession and leadership development. Why are you doing this? But I knew, first, you know, that it was personally important to me, but also I could see as women were rising in power in society, as you know, men were starting to look to create a more egalitarian world of shared responsibility in the domestic sphere, that this was going to just continue to be, an important question. So I didn't ignore the signal in me where, you know, that where something, you know, there was a spark of insight and passion for this issue, and I pursued it despite, you know, the external signals telling me, you know, that I shouldn't. And I want to emphasize that here because it's an important aspect of what I try to help people do in my work with them as an educator and as a scholar and as a consultant, is to pay attention to those moments where you have insight about who you are and who you want to become, and to really try to invest in those despite whatever resistance you might face. It turned out to be a really smart choice for me because as a man at the Wharton School, which used to be known as the Wharton School of Finance and Commerce, if I'm not mistaken, you know, talking about families and children, I was already estranged, and now I was even stranger. And so I stood out, especially because it was almost all women who were focusing on this issue at the time. So I got a lot of attention simply by dint of being a man, you know, attending to what was seen then as a women's issue. And I was lucky in that way. And so how has it evolved, especially recently in the wake of the pandemic? Um, I think there's a lot more both confusion, angst, and opportunity as a result of the jolt that pandemic life has given us. For years and years, decades now, an essential aspect of my total leadership approach is experimentation. The idea of doing experiments designed to produce what I call four-way wins. That's demonstrably improved performance at work, at home, in the community, and for yourself personally. That's your mind, body, and spirit. I've been helping people learn how to undertake such experiments in a way that helps them to learn what it takes to lead change as a leader in all the different parts of your life, change that is indeed sustainable because it works for all the different parts, not just for one part traded for another. The idea of experimentation has become now, it was growing as an idea for how you figure out the work-life puzzle, but with this imposition of exogenous explosion of what do we do now? How do we operate when we can't see each other in person? There's been all kinds of novel approaches that people are trying, and the idea of let's just try this and see how this works for us is now it's natural for people and organizations to be trying to find new ways, and they're discovering new ways, and we will continue to do that. And now it's as I say, normal and legitimate to do that, whereas prior to the pandemic and Zoom life, the notion of experimenting with new models of where, when, and how you get work done was a lot harder to get support for, because of all the inertial forces arrayed against it, tradition, and standard operating practices, especially among them. So, I kind of look with a hint of optimism at where we are now. Nobody knows how to, plan for 5 years from now. But we do have a much more open attitude and commitment to trying new models and seeing what works. And I think that's smart. And again, gives me some hope, because people are going to be finding solutions that work for them in their setting, in their organization. And there's no one best way that works. Now, I'm ignoring in my response here what you pointed to as some of the difficulties that organizations are having, especially where you encounter an intergenerational conflict between the folks in charge who are my age or younger. Still, I'm 71. So the people running organizations now, they grew up in a pre-pandemic, pre-Zoom, pre-work from home hybrid world, and there are real risks to not being together. But there are also great benefits to flexibility, and so it's finding the right mix, and really embracing the concept of innovation through experimentation that some people are struggling with. But those that are embracing it, I think, will get ahead in their productivity, as well as competition for the best talent in the labor market.
Can you tell us, Stu? You spent two and a half years working with Ford in leadership development. What was the genesis of that, and how did it challenge and inform your ideas? Because it was a hell of a change from the Wharton School to working leadership development at Ford.
A whole world of difference. I was very fortunate to be invited by the CEO of that company to join them as part of his initiative to bring in 30 or so of us at the senior executive level in the top 300, he brought in about 30 of us in the space of 3 months of the first 3 months of his tenure. This was Jack Nasser in 1999, as part of his culture change initiative. Fresh ideas from different places, different industries, different mindsets. And my good friend and one of my great mentors, Noel Tichy, had been working with Jack and his team, and said, "You want to reinvent leadership development? Stu's your guy." So I passed muster there in terms of the interview process, but I remember vividly the interview with Jack at the end of an intensive period of conversations with a lot of different folks. His was the last one. We were scheduled for a half hour. We ended up talking for at least an hour and a half. And I said to him, "Look, Jack, I had just published in the Harvard Business Review in 1998, the end of 1998, an article called "WorkLife: The End of the Zero-Sum Game," which was the initial formulation of the ideas that ultimately became Total Leadership, and that we had been gathering from field research with the WorkLife Integration Project, where we took consultants, early players in the work-life game in organizations, consultants, government people who were interested in this topic. We gathered them and then got them to go out into the field to study people who were good at this and what good organizations were doing to support the growth of flexibility and support for the whole person in their companies. And that's where we developed the initial principles of what it means to be real, to be whole, to be innovative as a leader in your life, and how to grow those capacities in people, was what I was committed to bringing to the work of leadership development at Ford. So I said, this is the approach I'm going to take, is the growth of the leader as a whole person. And he said, "Great, I love it." Boom, and off I went. So, starting from there, where I had support from the CEO, and my direct boss was a brilliant man named David Murphy. He headed up human resources for the whole company, and there was a great interest in innovating in leadership development. I had already started some things at Wharton. I'd been working with companies on their leadership development initiatives, so I had quite a bit of experience already in practice working with companies. But here I was now the senior executive responsible for this activity, and I'd never experienced anything like that. I mean, I'd run teams and projects and started things, but this was a completely different environment. And one of the great, I could talk at great length about the amazing people that I got to meet and learn from there. And I think that was, for me, one of the important sort of revelations and things for which I'm so grateful. And that is, many academics, I will confess, just speaking for myself anyway, we look upon people in practice as, they're operating in the dirty mess of the real world, but we're operating in the ideas of philosophy and theory, and so maybe we're a little smarter. There is that sensibility that I think is still a part of the academy. Anyway, I will confess to having some of that. And so I remember going to my very first, there was a transition period where I was still finishing up my classes at Wharton, and then beginning my work at Ford part-time until I was done with the semester and able to engage full-time in that role. And I remember the first time I taught a class of Wharton MBAs in the morning, and in the afternoon I was at a meeting with 50 Ford executives, and sat at the table with the CEO and some other folks. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what? I just left these, brilliant, young, amazing minds, and we're just having so much fun. And now I'm in the Midwest. I'm back in the Midwest, and it's just a kind of dullness in this room, and all these old folks, and like, what the heck did I just do? Oh my goodness! But of course, that was just a surface impression. And as I got to know the people there and to see what it was like to try to make something real happen with with all kinds of adversity and competition, I was amazed at how brilliant and inventive and committed people were. And I was just so inspired by that. There's also a sense in the academy where you're kind of it's very much a free market, where you're an intellectual entrepreneur and you're competing, for space, in the marketplace of ideas. But when I arrived at Ford, now of course there's internecine warfare in every organization, but there was a genuine sense of, okay, you're now a brother, and your success is my success. So how can I help you? Which I have to say is not something that you always encounter in the academy. I don't want to go on at great length about that. I'm deeply blessed and grateful for the friends I have in the academy, especially at Wharton. But this notion of we're in this together, and we're here to help each other, and we're trying new things, and what do you need? That was kind of a jolt. And there was also the sense that we were affecting lots of people's lives in our work. We pretty quickly ramped up to 2,500 people a year going through our programs, and the Total Leadership program was born there because it was an open environment for innovation, and the time was right. It was just right as people were realizing that you had to account for the whole person. And when we, in the first couple of iterations of the Total Leadership program, insisted, part of your progress in this program means that you're going to have to create experiments that are designed to make our company better, and to improve your mental and physical health, and to improve your family life and your community. And we're going to help you to do that. When we were telling people that's the challenge here, for you to do that, it was like a festival of innovation and relief. Wow, you're telling us that what you want us to do is to live more fruitful lives while we're contributing to this company. And yes, and we're going to help you figure that out. We don't have the answers, you do, but we're going to give you the tools and the ideas and the support to discover those solutions for yourself in a way that works for you and us. And that was, I think, a revolutionary idea. And I was extremely grateful to be surrounded by amazing people who helped to bring that idea to fruition.
Yeah, and Total Leadership came out in 2008, and you've alluded to the three kind of key elements to it. Be real, and I think they kind of they bear kind of reading another line there. Be real, be whole, and be innovative. So be real, act with authenticity by clarifying what's important. Be whole, act with integrity by respecting the whole person, and be innovative, act with creativity by continually experimenting. And I think those three elements are still really resonate. And I'm always surprised that they came out in 2008, which actually seems quite a long time ago now. In a lot of thought around those areas since that time.
Well, I first wrote about them with Perry Christensen and Jessica DeGroot in that Harvard Business Review article in 1998. And then at Ford, we established this program, started to use that language And to be real is to clarify your values and your vision. And we have exercises that help people to do that, including writing about their critical episodes in their life history and sharing those, writing their leadership vision, sharing that, taking the four-way view and looking at what's important in the different domains of their lives. And so, that's the root. And of course, that set of ideas has been around for a while, but we brought together a set of tools that really made it sing and brought it to life and put that work in the context of peer-to-peer coaching, so that the social accountability and support that emerged as people were exploring their past, their future, together, realizing that everyone is struggling with clarifying what matters most to them, and to be able to articulate that and to try to then act on it. That was a critical element of sort of the recipe. And to be whole is simply to identify who matters most to you in the different parts of their lives, and then to really dig into understanding what it is that they expect of you and what you expect of them, and then to speak with them about those mutual needs and expectations in a way that allows them to tell you the truth and for you to do the same, which is, of course, different with each person and each group. And so the skill development in having a series of 8 or 10 what we called stakeholder dialogues with people at work, at home, and in the community in the space of a few weeks, with feedback and a reflection surrounding those conversations was rapid and deep for so many people. All of that knowledge then used to design smart experiments intended to pursue four-way wins, and then reflecting on what worked and what didn't in those experiments, it really made a lot of sense for our participants, and was, as I said earlier, so warmly welcomed as a kind of relief from the single-minded focus on just work. So that all happened in 2000. When I got back to Wharton in 2001, I started to try to teach this in our MBA program, and then in our executive MBA program, where it really took off. And so it was, and I was iterating constantly on the design, and submitted a manuscript to Harvard Business Press in 2002. And it was only 2003, based on what I was learning about this, and I thought, this is great, everybody's going to love this. Well, it wasn't until 5 iterations and 5 years later that it was accepted for publication in 2008. But all the while I'd been revising, learning from teaching, and then starting to speak in organizations, and then starting to bring the workshop in various formats to organizations around the world. So 2008 is when the book came out, but I'd been at it for some time before.
Somebody I worked with years ago, Gareth Jones, a British leadership author, co-author of Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? And he always said the key question to ask somebody is, how did you get here?
Yeah.
And I think it's a great question, but I think the answer for you, Stu, is over your shoulder, the photograph behind you. Can you tell us, because everybody can see the photograph, who's the photograph of, and how did it help you get here?
That's such a lovely question. Indeed, that's how I start all my programs now. Is the first thing that we do, the very first thing that we do, is we ask people to write about critical episodes in their life history that have shaped their values and beliefs, 3 to 5 of them, and be willing, things that you're willing to talk about, that you're willing to share, because there are obviously things that happened in our past that we don't want to talk about, and that is the entry point to learning more about what it means to be real, clarifying your values. Where have you come from? Of course, it then goes into where are you now and where are you going, but that's the starting point. And I agree with Gareth and others who take that approach, as Warren Bennis did. You mentioned him earlier. So that's a picture of my grandfather, my mother's father, who emigrated from Eastern Europe in the 20s by way of Cuba, where he was a grocer. And he was a grocer here in this country. And that is a picture of him holding a picture of a newspaper with the headline, "Giants Win." That was a baseball team here in the United States, in New York. And he's standing in front of his little grocery shop in Brooklyn. And he is a source of great inspiration to me. And I think he embodies the immigrant spirit of America. You know, we are a nation of immigrants, and we have always benefited by the embrace of immigrants in our country. And I'm a product of that, as just about everyone I know here is. So his story, his journey of discovery of himself by necessity, having to leave Eastern Europe under very oppressive, social and political circumstances, economic circumstances, and to create a world here that I am, a fruit of, and now my children and grandchildren are. I talk to them about him and my other grandparents. I think, I take seriously the idea that we are just, a link in the chain. And I think this gets back to where we started, Stuart, where, the golden thread is, it's about intergenerational connection and the continuity of life. And I think the more we take seriously our origins and the people, on whose shoulders we stand, and think about the consequences of our actions today for those who are going to come after us, it just it makes so much sense to me that organizations would take that idea seriously, and that we will be a better world for it.
Stu, thank you very much for your time. A very, very neat ending. Some fantastic insights, some great passion about really important issues. Check out Stu's work at the Total Leadership website. Check out Total Leadership, the book, because it's still timely and important. And look out for new work from Stu in the future. Stu, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stuart.